Hi, Mike. I'd like to keep my personal information as well as my location private, as my family still lives in the same general area. Here's my story. At 17, my life was complicated. I was uprooted from one side of Kentucky and now lived with my stepdad and his new wife in eastern Kentucky, not too far from the Big Sandy River. I had a frightening encounter with what I later learned was a Bigfoot. Bigfoot, if anyone tells you they're some kind of ape and just elusive, don't believe them. This thing was smart and was concocting a plan. Let me give you a little background first. The area was new to me, and lucky for me, my stepdad's wife introduced me to some of her friends' kids. There were two houses on the property. One you consider the main house, and the other, well, was a small run-down cabin a few hundred feet away from the first one. Both nestled in the woods, but the smaller one was dug in a little more. Probably the original home. My stepdad suggested that if I wanted, the cabin could be mine. It was rustic and old, and was basically just one large open room with a bathroom. I jumped at the idea. After some cleaning, painting, and updating the inside with carpet, it was a pretty good space for me and my dog. I was excited to have my own place. So what does a teenager do for fun in the middle of nowhere? Well, on occasion I'd go hunting, but mostly I sat around and watched movies. Since I was probably 13 or so, I was hooked on horror movie genre. I had stacks of movies. Some nights I'd get together with a couple of my new friends and we'd watch some of the old classics like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I really liked zombie movies the most, and there were plenty to choose from. Some even had subtitles. I could go on and on. I dreamed of being in a world of the undead in the midst of an apocalypse. This was decades before the undead would become part of pop culture. Well, the four of us would get loud on occasion, but mostly from the TV volume, and even though the family were just a few hundred feet away, my dad would walk halfway down from his property and shout, "Cole!" That was my cue to turn it down. I was, after all, a tenant living rent-free, and not to mention unemployed too. I should have been more gracious. On any given night, I'd go up and raid the house of refreshments and snacks. My friends would come over, bring a sleeping bag, and just crash on the floor. Late one night as we slept, one of my friends woke up hearing what she said was growling, and it was coming from the other side of the door. There was only one door, and it was about 10 feet across from my bed. I've always been a heavy sleeper and didn't hear any growling, and what she said sounded like a crash against the door. She and the others heard it, and they did eventually wake me up. Julie was frantic and kept asking if there were bears or maybe cougars around. "I guess, I don't know," I responded. We were in the woods. Anything was possible. Being kind of groggy, I didn't really understand what all the questions were about. As I recall, the next morning, Julie and the others kept talking about weird growling. She apparently heard it best and was very descriptive, saying it sounded like a man's raspy breathing but with a guttural growl added in. "It went on for like 10 minutes, and you never heard it? Did you? Did you? Oh my God, the crashing sound just freaked me out. How could you sleep through all that?" "I never heard it. I'm a heavy sleeper," I countered back. "Maybe you were having a nightmare from watching The Howling or The Evil Dead." We eventually just dropped it, but I did remember something that happened earlier. On occasion, since I'd moved into the cabin, I would be followed walking back from my parents' house. It was always at night, and it sounded like someone and not something, like a dog or a bear. But I did mention I watch a lot of scary movies, so I played it off to my imagination. A few days later, and the growling incident was forgotten. Later in the week, some more of my friends were sacked out on the floor after another zombie-thon. In the wee hours of the night, most of us half asleep and halfway through another movie, we heard, "Cole! Cole! Cole!" Everyone looked back at me as if to say, "Okay, let's dial down the volume," and the look on my face was of surprise, since my dad had left to go out of town earlier that day. "Who is that? That's not my dad. He's not even home." As I walked to the door, I hesitated, almost like a gut feeling. I walked back and reached down under my bed to grab my 12 gauge and a flashlight. The gun was a single shot, and the only ammunition I had was birdshot. But whoever this was would get the message if I had to shoot. As I opened the door, I noticed that the room was dead silent. All eyes were on me, including my dog, who had been keeping my shotgun company under the bed. He'd been oddly silent the last few days, and now was staying out of sight. I peered through one of the small front windows, which was pointless since it was pitch black outside. I'm really not that brave, but my curiosity and my shotgun gave me a false sense of security. I tried not to think about the fact that I had birdshot, and only one shot. Who was this joker calling my name? How did he know me? As I walked slowly out the door, I thought I saw movement to my right. I yelled back, "Turn on the light!" I turned my flashlight on and pointed it into the darkness. "Cole! Cole! Cole!" The voice sounded deep, much deeper than my dad's. It wasn't him, but who? And the voice seemed to be traveling behind the house. That was enough for me. My heart was racing, and my gut was telling me, "Don't go back there." As I quickly turned around in full retreat, I pointed my shotgun and flashlight in front of me, and at that moment, my light caught this thing square in the face, and I let out a scream. I fired my gun at point-blank range into this thing. I think for the next few instances, everything moved in slow motion. I felt like I was in one of those movies I love to watch, except in reality, it was an 8-foot-tall, monstrously wide beast. In a matter of seconds, it was there, and then it was gone. I thought I could hear it run away, because there were large, loud, thumping sounds. Of course, it could have been my heart. And that's when my brave friends came rushing to my side. I was laying on the ground, my shotgun locked in my hands, staring off into the woods in the direction of the creature's departure. I will say that they picked me up and carried me back into the house. I was grateful to be inside the old cabin, and my dog, well, Britt, he was still under the bed. I don't think he ever moved. He may have been the smartest one out there. My comment earlier about how I thought it was smart. First, it said my name. How did it know my name? Or was it just mimicking? There were times when my dad was outside shouting my name practically every other night. So did he use my name to lure me out? It knew we were inside. Was he looking for an easy meal? Maybe it heard the TV? But it had walked around the house, and I believe it was trying to come up behind me. I must have surprised it because its eyes were wide and had a look of shock on its face. It was so tall that I actually thought it was falling on me. It had to be every bit of 8 feet tall. Its face and features were huge. I remember its eyes the most. They seemed so big. I could see the whites. But the face itself was so scraggly and old-looking. My flashlight picked up large, blocky yellow teeth. It had a lot of facial hair, but it looked like a really big man with a very pale face. All I could think of was zombie. I know some think Bigfoot is a sort of ape, but that's definitely not what I saw. This reminded me of a Neanderthal man from my science book, but much larger. After that night, I spent the next couple of days in the main house drawing what I saw. My pictures can be a little dark, and I only draw in black and white. I think it gives the image a sharpness. I keep focusing on the eyes. They were so big. A few more days passed, and finally I got up the nerve to look around the outside of the cabin. I could see and feel large impressions in the ground. They were large feet. That was all I ever found, and when my stepdad returned from his trip, we had a long talk. I told him everything. He didn't say he didn't believe me, but I could tell he was skeptical. Having a change of heart about living with him now, I wasn't prepared to stay in that cabin any longer. A week later, I was heading back to my mom's house on the other side of the state. It's been 30 years, and my fascination with Bigfoot continues. I don't go out looking for them, but I know they're out there. I only read about sightings or watch movies. Some are even horror. But the stories that keep me up at night are the ones that say they can talk. Thanks for letting me share my story. Cole.